Pricing your medical billing business services can be pretty hard sometimes. And I don't know if it's because we make it hard or if it's that is hard, but for some reason, it just seems to be one of the hardest things to do when you're starting a medical billing business or when you have just started your medical billing business. So I'm going to continue the conversation about pricing. I spoke about how to charge in my last video. I'll link that above. And then I did a video before talking about pricing mistakes. There are so many factors that you have to keep in mind when it comes to pricing, and eventually it will get easier and easier. But when it comes to trying to decide that at first, it can be pretty hard sometimes. So I'm hoping to discuss 4 pricing strategies that you can use when you decide to start your medical billing business. I'm going to talk about 2 of them in this video, and then I'm going to talk about 2 of them in my next video. Before I tell you what those 2 are that we're going to speak about today, I wanted to talk to you about expenses. Expenses are important when it comes to your medical billing business because you want to be able to cover the expenses that you will have as a business owner. As a business owner, you will need to pay for, certain things that you need in your business that you need to use, that, maybe the client needs to use. You need to pay for certain things, and you want to make sure that you are able to pay for that with the money that you make from your clients, from the services that you provide. So you need to make a list of what expenses you'll have. Now, of course, you may miss a few here or there. Sometimes you get expenses that you're not expecting, but there are certain expenses that probably most of us will have. And that is insurance, for the company. That is the E&O insurance, that's errors and omissions. You'll probably have fees for office expenses, for books. If you have an actual physical location, you have to pay for that, for utilities, for internet, for telephone. There will be expenses that most of us have. So make sure you write this down so that you can have an idea of what it will cost you each month and how much you should be bringing in each month. And then after you do that, you will probably have a minimum of what you want to bring in each month. Now, this is not going to equate to what you charge each provider, because if you only have one provider and you have expenses of $5,000 a month, then you don't just want to charge that one client $5,000, but that would help you determine that, okay, I need to get 3 small clients, or I need to get 1 large client. You need to kind of have an idea of what your minimum is going to be in order to cover the expenses that you have. So let's jump into the 2 pricing strategies that we're going to talk about today. And the first one is percentage based and per hour. So as far as percentage based, that is when you charge a certain percentage of what you collect for the provider each month or every 2 weeks. It's normally each month, but I know some billing companies that charge every 2 weeks. And whatever that amount is, it can be from insurance or it can be from the insurance and patient collections. So again, that depends on what you and the provider decide upon. So for example, if you bring in $100,000 for your provider in the month of June and you charge 6%, then you will get $6,000 of that for that particular month. When it comes to monthly charging, the average percentage is between 4 and 10%. Now again, that is an average, and 4% might sound low, 10% might sound high, but you need to try to determine what you want that to be. As far as the pros for percentage billing, if the provider makes a lot of money, then ultimately you make a lot of money. Like I said in my example, if the provider brings in $100,000 for that month, then you can get $6,000 if you're charging 6%. So the more the provider brings in, the more you can make. When it comes to percentage, each month will be different. So for the most part, the provider is not going to make the same exact amount each month. So if they continue to bring in more and more revenue, then you get paid more and more. So of course, that's going to be a pro. The next pro is that it's commonly used. This type of strategy is commonly used, or it was commonly used for the most part. And so you can get an idea of what to charge if you talk to other billers in your area, who's doing the same thing you're doing. You can get an idea of what they charge and kind of be in the range of what they charge. You don't have to charge exactly what they're charging, but you can kind of get an idea. So if you're into billing for mental health and, a lot of billers in your area charge 8% for mental health, then you might decide to charge, 8%, 9%, 7%. You have a pretty good idea of what to charge. So another pro is that you may attract a lot of small practices. So if you are, let's say, working a 9-to-5 job and you're doing this also as well, you might not have a lot of time to deal with the bigger practices. And so you want to target smaller practices. And in targeting smaller practices, they may not make as much revenue as a larger practice, but you attract them because they get to pay you a percentage of what you bring in for them. So if they only make a small amount, then they pay you a certain percent of the small amount, and they don't have to feel like they can't afford to have these billing services. So you tend to attract smaller clients who you are getting paid by how much you bring in for them, and then they can pay you off of that. Now, to, counteract that, as a con, is just that. If the provider is bringing in a small amount of money or, not a big amount of revenue each month, then you don't get a big amount of money. If the provider is a small practice and they only bring in $20,000 and you're getting 6% of $20,000, then that might not be enough to cover what you need to do. So that could be a con of percentage-based pricing. What also can be a con is the takebacks. So we know about takebacks. Insurance companies will pay you some money and then decide a couple months later that they want to take it back. And because you are getting paid percentage, you get paid on what you collect. When there's a take back and they take back the money, then you have to basically give back that percentage of that money as well. So I hope I explained that right, but you get the percentage off of what's brought in. So when you're refunding money to patients or when you're refunding money to insurances, then you're also going to be deducted that certain percent that you got. And then percentage-based billing can be illegal in some areas. Although this was a commonly used strategy for pricing your services, in some areas it is illegal. And you need to see if percentage-based billing in your area is illegal. You don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize you or the client. So you just want to make sure that the way you're pricing is legal in your area. Now, there have been times that I have been paid percentage for doing medical billing. And it's 2 times that I've been paid by percentage. One of the times is when I was an employee. And that time, I think I got paid 6% of what was brought in. And that was for insurance and for patient collections. I also was doing other things like office manager, bookkeeping, all of those other things. But as far as medical billing was concerned, I got paid 6% of whatever was brought in. And for me as an employee, that was some good money. I was working for a doctor who did surgeries, and we all know surgeries get paid a lot. And so I got a good chunk of money. The second time I got paid as percentage was for a provider who was not seeing office patients. They were seeing patients mainly in the hospital, and they weren't seeing them that often. It was kind of like they were weaning down. They had a practice before. They were just, starting to slow down, soon gonna retire, and I was doing the billing for them. So they paid me 10%. Now, the difference in that is that one paid me 6%, one paid me 10%, but the volume or the revenue that was brought in was completely different. So because the provider that was not seeing many patients, they were gonna retire soon, they paid me 10%. That was more than the 6%, but I actually got more money when I was making 6% than I was making 10%. So those are some of the things you have to factor in as far as volume is concerned. So when is the best time to use percentage-based billing? In my opinion, the best time to use that is when you are dealing with a provider who brings in a large amount of revenue and they are established. When a provider is just starting out, they usually don't bring in a large amount of revenue. And if they do, you don't really know how stable they are. They might start off a year strong, bringing in a lot of revenue, and then they kind of fall off, business fails, something happens. So I usually may decide to charge percentage if the provider brings in a large amount of revenue and they are established. Now, before I forget, I just wanted to let you know that my Medical Billing Maven shop is live here on YouTube. It has my shirts, my cups, mugs, journals, all of that good stuff. You can click on the shop link, I think it has in the bottom of this video, and it also has a tab on my channel. So if you're interested in purchasing any of the shirts or mugs or journals, then you can do it right through YouTube. And also, if you want to schedule your remote one-on-one, where we can also talk about pricing, because again, pricing is subjective and it's personal to you. And if you just have questions, even after I go through this video, make sure you schedule your remote one-on-one. We can talk about how to price specifically for you and what your goals are for your medical billing business. So the link is in the description box. Make sure you check that out. And the next way that you can price your billing services is per hour. So per hour is basically you're making sure you keep track of your time and how many hours you provide billing services for this particular provider. So for example, if you charge $50 an hour and you work 10 hours a week, then you get paid $500 for that week. Now, the average price hourly is kind of like maybe between $25 and $75. Now, that's a big jump, and it is, it depends on a lot of factors, because if you are maybe new and just starting out, don't know too much, you might feel like you need to charge $25, that you don't need to charge as much. But if you're somebody who have been a medical biller for a while, you know this specialty, you know it very well, you can charge upwards of $75 because you have a specific experience or expertise that the provider needs. Now, you might say, oh, who is going to pay me $75 an hour, or who's going to pay me $50 an hour to do this? But there are providers who will. Because remember, as a billing business owner, first of all, you have expenses, you have things that you need to cover. And second of all, they're most likely not paying you, for 40 hours a week. They're paying you for a certain amount of numbers a week. They're not paying your taxes. They're not paying your, vacation time, your benefits, insurance, any of those other things. So it still comes out cheaper for them. Now, the pros of hourly billing is that it's kind of easy to determine what you're going to charge and calculate. So again, if you decide that you're going to charge a provider $50 an hour, you decide that all you need is 10 hours in a week to do their billing, then 50 times 10, 500, you're good to go. No big long calculations. So that's a pro. Also, another pro is that your payment is not dependent on how much the provider brings in. So if this is a small provider, let's say this month they barely bring in anything, they bring in $2,000 for the month, it doesn't matter. If you worked for 10 hours for that week, then you get paid that $500, or you should get paid that $500 regardless. So it doesn't depend on what the provider brings in. If the provider is on vacation and don't barely bring in anything, that has nothing to do with you. You should still get paid. Now, the cons of hourly pricing is that your services are based on time, not value. So if at the beginning of your contract with the client, you said, okay, I'm going to charge you $50 an hour. And at the beginning, you were doing 10 hours a week. But as you started to do more and more, you got faster and faster. You learned different things about the client, so you got faster. And so now it only takes you 5 hours a week. Now you are getting $250 less each week because you have ultimately become better and faster. And you're kind of getting penalized for doing your job better. So that's one of the cons, at least for me. If you get better at your job, you shouldn't be penalized. The next thing is that in that, you will probably start to not use your time wisely. So because you are anticipating this $500 a week and you want to make sure that you get it, you probably would kind of like prolong out the services so that you can then get paid for those 10 hours, which you shouldn't do at all. But we all know we've worked as employees, and you do that sometimes when there's nothing to do or when there's little to do. You kind of prolong what you have to do, which brings me into my next con, is that you're not an employee. You are a business owner. And if you can use your time efficiently, get your things done, then do that. So charging hourly kind of gives me, at least, the feeling like I'm an employee. And the point of me starting my business is that I not be an employee. So it's up to you. You can do what you want, but that's a con for me. And as far as me getting paid hourly, I have gotten paid hourly as a medical biller. And this is when I was in a 9-to-5 job. And I can say that I got paid pretty good compared to other people. I think in my area, you get like maybe 15 to 20, let's say $15 to $20 as a medical biller. I have gotten paid upwards of $25, $30 as a medical biller. And so that's a good amount as an employee. And I didn't really have a problem with that being an employee at the time. That's what I was getting paid. It wasn't a big deal. But again, as a billing business owner, I'm not an employee. So I don't want to feel like I am. I don't want to have to be clocking my hours and doing all of that stuff, which actually you kind of do still be aware of the hours that you are spending on each client. But I didn't want to have to really clock it down to the T as you would as an employee. But when I would suggest that you use hourly rates in your billing business is when you're doing a project. So if a provider asks you to do, let's say, a specific project, because not all the time you'll be doing the full revenue cycle or the full medical billing for that provider. So you might just be doing outstanding agent. They might have a set of outstanding agent that they want you to complete, and charging hourly may be a good way to do that instead of charging by percentage. Little tip, when you're doing AR, you don't really know how much you're going to collect. So even if the provider has a big amount outstanding and you decide you want to charge percentage for that, you still might not get nothing, but you have been doing a lot of work. So I always would charge hourly when it comes to projects that providers want me to do. If they want me to clean up certain things, I would charge hourly to do that. So make sure you check me out in the next video where I go over the other 2 strategies that you can use in your medical billing business to price your services. I'll see you in the next one.